Growing up in my family always felt like walking a tightrope. My parents, David and Linda, had one simple philosophy: family comes first. That sounds nice in theory, but in practice, it meant sacrificing your own needs, wants, and even sanity if it meant serving the family's greater good. And by family's greater good, they mostly meant my older sister Jessica. Jessica, for years my senior, was the golden child. She always had been. She was the one who got praised at every family gathering, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. She married young to a man named Eric and had 3 kids in quick succession. And somehow, despite being a mother of 3, she never actually raised them. That responsibility fell on my parents. I, on the other hand, was the black sheep, not because I did anything wrong, but because I did something unforgivable in their eyes. I chose myself. I moved to the city, built my career, and lived alone in an apartment that, to my mother, might as well have been a prison cell. Every time I visited home, I heard the same lecture. "Sarah, you're so selfish. You have all this free time, all this money. Why aren't you helping your sister? Your poor nieces and nephew barely see you. They ask about you all the time. Jessica is overwhelmed, and here you are, living your fancy city life while she struggles." Jessica wasn't struggling. Jessica barely lifted a finger. My parents took the kids to school, cooked their meals, helped with homework, and put them to bed. Jessica went on vacations, had weekly spa days, and somehow, despite being so overwhelmed, always found time for brunch with her friends. I ignored their guilt trips as best as I could, but every visit home drained me. My parents' house, once a place of warmth in my childhood, now felt suffocating. So I minimized my trips back, making up excuses about work. It wasn't a lie. My job was demanding. But even if I had all the time in the world, I wouldn't have spent it catering to Jessica's entitled existence. Then, last Thanksgiving, everything exploded. I arrived at my parents' house a few hours before dinner. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt the familiar wave of exhaustion hit me. The house was chaos. My parents were running around, tending to the kids, setting the table, checking on the turkey. Jessica sat in the living room, scrolling through her phone while Eric half-heartedly tossed a football to their 6-year-old son Ethan. "Sarah!" My mom spotted me and rushed over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, thank God. We need your help. Can you take the kids to the park for a bit? Jessica needs some rest." I looked past her at my sister, whose exhaustion looked a lot like boredom. "Mom, I just got here," I said, forcing a polite smile. "Can I at least put my bag down first?" Jessica sighed dramatically. "Sarah, it's just an hour. You never spend time with them." My jaw tightened, but I swallowed the retort bubbling up inside me. This was a battle I wouldn't win. Fine. I took the kids to the park, played with them, bought them ice cream, and returned 2 hours later, exhausted. The second I stepped inside, my mother pounced. "Oh, good, you're back. Can you help set the table? And maybe take a look at the gravy? I think it's too salty." I sighed but nodded, rolling up my sleeves. Meanwhile, Jessica sat in the exact same spot, now laughing at something on her phone. Dinner was tense. My father said grace, and for a moment, there was peace. Then, my mom turned to me with her usual look of concern. "Sarah, honey, have you given any more thought to moving back home?" I clenched my fork. "Mom, we've talked about this. I just don't understand why you insist on being alone in that cold, empty apartment. Don't you want to be around family?" "You mean, don't I want to be Jessica's unpaid nanny?" I snapped before I could stop myself. The table went silent. Jessica gasped. "Excuse me." I set my fork down. "I'm tired of this. Every time I come home, it's the same thing. I'm expected to drop everything to help you, while you do nothing. You have 3 kids, Jessica. You should be raising them, not mom and dad. How dare you?" Jessica's voice rose. "Do you know how hard it is to be a mother?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You wouldn't know either. You've never actually been one." Jessica's face turned red. "You're just jealous because I have a family and you don't." My mother gasped. My father set down his glass of wine a little too hard. "Enough," he said. But I wasn't done. I turned to my parents. "And you too. When are you going to stop enabling her? When are you going to realize that you're not helping? You're just making it easier for her to keep taking advantage of you." "Sarah," my mom scolded. "Jessica needs support. That's what family does." I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "No, Mom. That's what you do. And I'm done being a part of it." I pushed my chair back and stood up. "Where are you going?" my dad asked. "Home," I said. "To my cold, empty apartment. At least there, I don't have to compete for love." I grabbed my coat and left, ignoring the shouting behind me. As I drove back to my apartment, my hands trembled. I had spent my entire life bending over backward for a family that never gave me the same effort in return. But not anymore. I was done. After Thanksgiving, I thought my parents might finally back off. I had made myself crystal clear. I was done being treated like an afterthought, done catering to Jessica's endless needs. But I underestimated just how far my parents would go to make sure I fell in line. It started with the phone calls. At first, they were subtle. My mother would call in the evening, her voice heavy with forced concern. "Sarah, honey, Jessica's been struggling so much lately. The kids have been sick, and she's just so overwhelmed. Maybe you could come over this weekend? Just for a few hours." I would grit my teeth and say no. Politely at first. Then firmly. Then came the guilt trips. "You have all this time to yourself. Jessica doesn't. You don't understand what it's like to be a mother, Sarah. It's a full-time job. You don't even have a family of your own. You wouldn't understand how hard it is. We're just asking for a little help. Is that so much to ask from a daughter? From a sister? Every call was the same. A different angle, the same demand. They wanted me to drop everything to take care of the children Jessica had so irresponsibly brought into the world. I refused every time. Then, one Saturday morning, I woke up to loud knocking at my apartment door. Groggy and annoyed, I stumbled to the door, already knowing it wasn't going to be good. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. My mother stood there, smiling as if she hadn't completely lost her mind. And standing beside her were Jessica's 3 children, Ethan, 6, Chloe, 4, and baby Ava in a stroller. We thought we'd bring them over for the day, my mother chirped, pushing past me as if she had every right to be there. Well, Mom, no. I snapped, stepping in front of her. You can't just show up and dump them on me. They love their Auntie Sarah, she said sweetly, completely ignoring my protests. Ethan grinned up at me, holding a toy truck. Can we play Aunt Sarah? Chloe twirled in a circle. Mommy said you have a big TV. I clenched my fists. Of course Jessica wasn't here. She never was when actual parenting was involved. I turned back to my mother. Take them home. Now. Her expression darkened. Sarah, don't be cruel. They're already here. Just spend the day with them. You live alone. You have all this space, all this free time. What else are you doing that's so important? My blood boiled. My job. My life. Things that have nothing to do with Jessica's kids. She sighed as if I were the unreasonable one. We're just trying to help you, sweetheart. One day when you finally have a family of your own, you'll understand. There it was again. That passive-aggressive jab about me being single and childless, as if my life was some tragic waste because I hadn't squeezed out a few kids like Jessica. I could feel my patience snapping. Mom. Take them. Home. Now. She pursed her lips, then looked down at the kids. I'm so sorry, sweethearts. Your Aunt Sarah doesn't want to spend time with you. Chloe's lower lip wobbled. Ethan's face fell. I wanted to scream. She was manipulating them, making me the villain. And it worked. Within seconds, Chloe started crying. Ethan sniffled. Even baby Ava, clueless to everything, began fussing in the stroller. My mother turned back to me triumphant. See what you've done? What I've done? I hissed. You brought them here without my permission. You used them to manipulate me. She crossed her arms. Fine. If you don't want to help your own family, then we'll just have to do things differently. She stormed out, pushing the stroller with her. Ethan and Chloe trudged after her, sniffling. I slammed the door shut and pressed my back against it, my heart racing. I knew this wasn't over. And I was right. The next escalation came in the form of my father. He rarely called me. He usually let my mother handle the emotional warfare, as I had come to call it. But 3 days after the drop the kids off stunt, he called me in the middle of my lunch break. Sarah, he said, his voice heavy, we need to talk. I swallowed my irritation. About what? Your mother is very upset. Jessica too. You really hurt them. I closed my eyes. Dad, if this is about me babysitting. It's about family, he interrupted. We support each other. That's what we do. No, I corrected, gripping my phone. That's what you do for Jessica. Not for me. He sighed, as if I were a lost cause. Sarah, you have no family of your own. No husband. No children. Do you really want to be alone forever? The words hit me like a slap. You think I should be responsible for Jessica's kids just because I don't have my own? I said, my voice shaking. It wouldn't hurt you to help, he said, his voice level, like he was explaining something simple to a stubborn child. I exhaled sharply. Dad. No. I'm not Jessica's built-in babysitter. If she didn't want to raise kids, she shouldn't have had them. There was a long silence. Then he said coldly, you're being very selfish. And he hung up. I braced myself for what would come next. But even I didn't expect what they did after that. One evening, after a long day at work, I arrived home to find a note taped to my door. Since you have so much space, we thought this would be better for everyone. You'll see how fulfilling it is to be around family. Love, Mom. I ripped the note off confused, until I saw the suitcase sitting beside my door. A child's suitcase. My stomach dropped. I turned my head. Sitting on the floor, hugging her knees to her chest, was Chloe. My 4-year-old niece. Alone. My heart started pounding. I rushed over. Chloe? Sweetheart, where's your mom? Where's Grandma? She looked up at me, her big blue eyes filled with confusion. Mommy said I can stay with you now. My breath caught in my throat. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking. I called my mother. No answer. I called Jessica. Straight to voicemail. I crouched in front of Chloe, forcing my voice to stay calm. Sweetie, do you know how you got here? Grandma brought me, she said. She said Auntie Sarah will take care of me now. A wave of cold rage surged through me. They had dumped a child on my doorstep. A 4-year-old. No warning. No discussion. They thought they could force me into this. I clenched my jaw and scooped Chloe up. Come on, sweetheart. We're going to Grandma's house. I strapped her into my car, white-knuckling the steering wheel the entire drive. When my mother opened the door, she looked surprised. You actually brought her back? She asked, as if she truly thought I'd just accept this. I shoved Chloe's suitcase inside. If you ever pull something like this again, I will call the police. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Sarah. I stepped back. I am not Jessica's nanny. And I am done with this family. Then I turned and left. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. After Thanksgiving, I thought I had finally set my boundaries. I had walked away from that dinner with my head held high, determined to stop being a pawn in my family's endless cycle of enabling Jessica. But I underestimated just how far my parents would go to force me into submission. It started subtly, at first, calls from my mother, dripping with disappointment. Sarah, sweetie, I just don't understand how you could say those things to your sister. Your father and I are heartbroken. We thought we raised you better than this. Jessica is really struggling. Don't you feel any sense of responsibility? I ignored them. I had heard it all before. But then the pressure intensified. One Saturday morning, I was woken up by the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop. I groggily reached for it and saw a flurry of missed calls from my mom and dad. Annoyed, I was about to silence it when the doorbell rang. Confused, I got up, still in my pajamas, and shuffled to the door. The second I opened it, my stomach dropped. Standing there were my parents. And with them Jessica's 3 kids. Surprise, my mother said, her tone too cheerful to be genuine. We thought we'd bring the kids over. Let you spend some quality time together. I blinked, still half asleep. What? My dad clapped a hand on my shoulder like this was some kind of joke. It's time you learned what it's like to take care of a family, Sarah. You have all this free time. Why not use it wisely? The kids, oblivious to the manipulation happening above their heads, ran inside before I could stop them. They immediately began jumping on my couch, pulling at the throw pillows. Mom, Dad, I have work today, I said, stepping outside and lowering my voice. You work from home, my mom shot back. You can take breaks. The kids will keep themselves busy. Jessica should be watching her own kids, I snapped. Where is she? She and Eric needed a break, my dad said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Marriage is hard, Sarah. Parenting is hard. I was fuming. And I'm not married. I don't have kids. This isn't my responsibility. Mom sighed, already pulling the guilt card. Oh, Sarah. You always think only of yourself. I wanted to scream. Instead, I turned and looked at the 3 kids who had now spilled a bag of chips all over my floor. If I forced them to leave, I'd be the villain. And they knew it. Fine, I muttered through clenched teeth. One day. Then you're coming back for them. But, of course, one day wasn't enough. The following weekend, they did it again. This time, they didn't even call ahead. They just dropped the kids off at my door and drove away before I could protest. When I called my mother, livid, she acted as if I was the unreasonable one. Sarah, what's the big deal? You're their aunt. You should be honored to spend time with them. You spend so much time alone. Don't you think this is good for you? Jessica has so much on her plate. Can't you think about someone other than yourself for once? It was an ambush. And no matter what I said, they just kept pressing. When guilt tripping didn't work, they escalated. One evening my dad called, his tone serious. Sarah, we need to talk. I braced myself. About what? Your inheritance. I almost laughed. Oh, this conversation. You think this is funny, he snapped. Your mother and I have given you everything. We paid for your education. We helped you get on your feet. And this is how you repay us? By abandoning your family. I clenched my jaw. Abandoning my family? You mean, refusing to be Jessica's unpaid babysitter? You're being dramatic, my dad said. All we're asking is that you help. You're not asking, I shot back. You're forcing. You're manipulating. And if you think threatening to cut me out of the will is going to scare me into submission, think again. Keep your money. I don't need it. He hung up on me. The next blow came from Jessica herself. She wasn't content with just letting our parents pressure me. She had to make it public. I woke up one morning to find my phone exploding with notifications. Texts from cousins, distant relatives, even old family friends. Confused, I opened Facebook, and there it was. Jessica had written a long, emotional post about how tragic it was that she had a selfish, heartless sister who refused to help with her children. She painted herself as a struggling mother, just barely holding it together, while I, her cold-hearted sister, refused to lift a finger. She ended it with some dramatic nonsense about how family should always come first, and how some people just don't understand the meaning of love and sacrifice. The comment section was a war zone. Some relatives ate it up, calling me selfish, cruel, even ungrateful. Others started asking questions. Wait, don't mom and dad basically raise your kids? One cousin, Emily, wrote. Jessica, I saw your Instagram story last week. Weren't you on a spa trip with friends? Another distant relative added. Slowly, the tide began to turn. A few family members started reaching out to me. My cousin Daniel called, his voice hesitant. Hey, I just wanted to check in, he said. I saw Jessica's post. But then I remembered she just bought a new car last month. And, isn't she always going on vacations? Yup, I said flatly. And your parents expect you to take care of her kids? Even though she and Eric both work and have money. Yup. There was a pause. Then Daniel sighed. Man, I think a lot of us just bought into the whole Jessica is struggling thing because that's what Aunt Linda and Uncle David always said. But now I'm starting to see the cracks. He wasn't the only one. Over the next few days, more and more relatives started questioning Jessica's sob story. Some even started openly calling her out. Jessica, Didn't you just post about getting Botox last week? Wait, why does Sarah have to help? Isn't that Eric's job too? Jessica, realizing she was losing control of the narrative, lashed out. She started posting passive-aggressive quotes about toxic people who abandon family. She made vague references to certain people who have lost their way. But it wasn't working anymore. The illusion was cracking. And for the first time, I wasn't the only one seeing it. After the disaster that was Thanksgiving and the following weeks of manipulation, blackmail, and social media warfare, I finally realized something. I was exhausted. Not just tired, but mentally, emotionally, and physically drained. I had spent years carrying the weight of my family's expectations, enduring their guilt trips, and trying to be the reasonable one in a completely unreasonable situation. And for what? No matter what I did, I was still the villain in their eyes. So for the first time in my life, I did something I never thought I'd do. I booked an appointment with a therapist. Her name was Dr. Elaine Carter. Mid-40s, sharp but kind, with the kind of presence that made me feel both safe and completely exposed at the same time. At our first session, I sat stiffly on her couch, arms crossed. I don't even know where to start. She smiled. Start wherever feels right. And so I did. I told her everything. The favoritism, the manipulation, the unspoken rule that Jessica must always come first, and the overwhelming guilt that had been drilled into me since childhood. I expected her to look at me with pity, to tell me that family is important or that I should try to see their perspective. Instead, she asked me a question that stopped me cold. Sarah, do you realize that you were emotionally parentified? I blinked. What? She leaned forward. Parentification happens when a child is expected to take on responsibilities that should belong to the adults. In your case, you weren't just expected to help, you were expected to sacrifice yourself for your sister's needs. And when you refused, they punished you with guilt, manipulation, and even financial threats. I stared at her, my mind spinning. I had always felt like something was wrong, but I had never put it into words. Dr. Carter continued, the problem isn't you, Sarah. The problem is that your family conditioned you to believe that your worth is tied to how much you can give. But you are not responsible for Jessica's choices. And setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish. It makes you healthy. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Over the next few months, I kept seeing Dr. Carter. She helped me unpack years of internalized guilt and showed me how to enforce my boundaries without falling into their emotional traps. And as I did, something incredible happened. I started to feel free. It wasn't easy. My parents didn't magically change overnight. If anything, they doubled down. One evening, my mom called, her voice thick with barely contained frustration. Sarah, I don't understand what's happening to you. You used to be such a good daughter. I took a deep breath, grounding myself. I'm still a good daughter, Mom. I'm just not a doormat anymore. She gasped like I had slapped her. How dare you speak to me that way? And then came the inevitable guilt trip. Your father and I are getting older, Sarah. What if something happens to us? Do you really want to spend the rest of your life knowing you abandoned your family? In the past, that would have worked. But now I saw it for what it was, emotional manipulation. Mom, I said calmly, I am not abandoning my family. I am refusing to be abused by it. If you and Dad want a relationship with me, it has to be built on respect, not obligation. She sputtered, grasping for control. Jessica is a grown woman, I cut in. And if she needs help, she can ask her husband. Not me. And for the first time in my life, I hung up first. Then, something amazing happened. At work, I had been pushing for a promotion for months. I had put in the hours, led difficult projects, and proven my worth 10 times over. But before therapy, there was always a voice in the back of my head whispering, what if you're not good enough? That voice was gone now. So when my boss, Daniel, called me into his office one afternoon, I walked in with my head high. Sarah, he said, we've been reviewing your performance and I have to say you've impressed us all. We'd like to offer you the senior project manager position. I felt a rush of emotion, pride, relief, and a deep sense of validation. Thank you, I said, and for the first time in years, I truly meant it. That night, I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on my balcony, staring out at the city skyline. I thought about the life I was finally building for myself. And then my phone buzzed. Jessica. I almost ignored it. But then I thought, no. I am not afraid of her anymore. I picked up. Sarah, she snapped, skipping any pleasantries. Do you even realize how much you've screwed me over? I sighed. Hello to you too, Jessica. I just got off the phone with Mom and Dad. They're still devastated by what you did. What I did. I laughed. You mean, refusing to be your unpaid babysitter? She ignored me. And now, because of you, some of our relatives aren't even helping me financially anymore. Do you know how hard it is to raise 3 kids? I took a sip of my wine. Maybe you should stop spending money on Botox and start saving for your children's future then. She gasped. How dare you? No, Jessica. How dare you? I cut her off. How dare you expect me to put my life on hold for you? How dare you manipulate our family into thinking you're a struggling single mom when you have a husband, 2 incomes, and live better than half the people in this country? She was silent for a second. Then she scoffed. I can't believe you're turning into such a selfish bee. I hung up. And this time, I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. A few weeks later, I got a call from my cousin Emily. Hey, Sarah, she said hesitantly. I just wanted to say, I see it now. Everything you said about Jessica, about your parents. I see it. That meant more to me than she would ever know. So she continued, how's life in the big city? You doing okay? I smiled, looking out at the skyline. Yeah, Emily. I really am. After everything, after the fights, the guilt trips, the threats, and the manipulations, I finally felt free. And it was a strange, unfamiliar feeling. For the first time in my life, I wasn't anxiously waiting for my phone to buzz with another demand. I wasn't rehearsing arguments in my head before seeing my parents. I wasn't carrying the weight of Jessica's choices on my back. I was just living. And it was amazing. I poured myself into work, excelling in my new senior project manager position. My days were busy but fulfilling, filled with challenges that actually rewarded my efforts instead of draining me dry. My social life flourished, too. Without the constant stress of my family's expectations, I finally had the energy to invest in friendships. One of those friendships was with Emily, my cousin, the one who had called me after everything blew up with Jessica. She and I started meeting up for coffee or lunch whenever our schedules allowed. At first, I was hesitant, still wary of my family's influence. But Emily had proven herself different. She wasn't trying to guilt me. She wasn't playing both sides. She just listened. One afternoon, we were sitting at a small cafe near my office, enjoying an early dinner, when she set down her fork and gave me a serious look. You know, she said, I talked to your parents last week. I raised an eyebrow. Oh. She sighed. I don't know if you'll care, but I think they're finally realizing they pushed you too far. I scoffed, leaning back in my chair. What does that mean? Emily hesitated. They didn't apologize. Of course not. But they did admit they were, maybe a little too pushy. I let out a humorless laugh. A little? Emily, they ambushed me. They dropped off Jessica's kids at my apartment unannounced, and then threatened to cut me out of the will when I said no. That's not a little pushy. That's insane. She nodded. I know. And trust me, I told them that. But, you have to understand, they genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. It's how they were raised. Family first, no matter what. I shook my head. No. Not family first. Jessica first. Always Jessica first. Emily sighed but didn't argue. Anyway, she said after a moment, I just thought you should know. They're processing. Slowly. I didn't respond right away. Processing wasn't the same as apologizing. It wasn't the same as making things right. But it was something. Not that it changed anything for me. A few months passed, and the strangest thing happened. My parents stopped calling as much. Oh, they still tried now and then, testing the waters, seeing if I would crack. My mother would call with her signature, I'm so disappointed in you, Sai. My father would leave curt messages about how hard this has been on the family. But when I didn't engage, when I didn't beg for their approval, they backed off. Jessica, of course, remained as insufferable as ever. She still made vague, passive-aggressive social media posts about certain people who had abandoned their families. She still tried to make herself the victim in every conversation. But fewer and fewer people were buying it. I found out from Emily that some relatives had outright stopped giving her money after seeing how she truly lived. Expensive vacations, shopping sprees, weekly spa treatments. One of our aunts even confronted her about it at a family gathering. Jessica, I saw you post about getting lip fillers last week. If you can't afford that, you can afford to take care of your own kids. Jessica had exploded, of course, screaming about how she deserved nice things, how being a mother was so hard, and how no one understood. But the cracks in her facade were growing. As for me, I had never been happier. Without the constant stress of my family's expectations, I felt light. I had time for hobbies, something I hadn't had in years. I started taking cooking classes, finally learning how to make more than just takeout and instant ramen. I joined a book club, met new people, and actually enjoyed my free time instead of spending it bracing for the next family disaster. And then, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, my boss called me into his office. I assumed it was for another big project, but instead, he smiled and said, Sarah, we've been really impressed with your work lately. We'd like to send you to our overseas branch for a few months, kind of a trial run for a potential long-term position. I stared at him shocked. Wait, you're considering me for an international promotion? He nodded. You've proven yourself, Sarah. You're capable, focused, and exactly the kind of leader we need. The old me, the family-pleasing, guilt-ridden me, might have hesitated. She might have worried about what her parents would think, about whether she should stay close just in case they needed her. But the new me? The free me? I smiled and said, I'd love that opportunity. A week later, I got a text from my mother. Mom, your father and I heard you might be moving. Is this true? I stared at the message for a moment, debating whether or not to respond. Then finally I typed back. Yes. It's an amazing opportunity for my career. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then again. Finally, her response came through. Mom, you're really leaving? I didn't need to ask what she meant. You're really leaving, Jessica? You're really leaving your responsibilities. I took a deep breath and replied. Yes. This time there were no guilt trips. No desperate attempts to rope me back in. Just one final message. Momo. I suppose we can't stop you. No, they couldn't. And I had never felt more at peace.